Hey everyone, ahlan wa sahlan fikum and welcome back. Today I have a very special video for you, which is a kind of language blog videos of the kinds that I do sometimes where I talk about Arabic or just language in general. Today I want to talk about roots, but let me just frame this discussion first of all by telling you the kind of format that we're going to do in it. Actually, I want to start doing a couple of sort of Wiktionary development blogs because what we've been doing in the background with Wiktionary is really, really exciting, and I really have wanted to show it to you, but I kind of want to wait until we have even more on there so that I can really showcase all the different features because we're always adding new things. So sometimes I've made a video about, let's say, the spreadsheet or something, and then like right after I make the video, I add something new. So I'm kind of waiting a little bit, but at the same time, some really interesting kind of food for thought and some really interesting questions have been raised by some of the things that we've been running into as we add new words. So specifically today, I'm going to talk about a new feature that we've added to Wiktionary, which is the creation of root pages that actually list all the different kind of words that come from a particular root. So the root itself has a dictionary page. Now, as we started to do this, we ran into some issues where we weren't really sure exactly what the root of a word was or how exactly to categorize it. And that's actually really interesting because you usually think of the root as being something like very evident or obvious in a word. Now, first of all, I guess we can ask, what is exactly a root in Arabic? Well, I mean, it's usually a three-letter root, and it's basically the three main consonants or the three consonants that make up the word itself, and then all the other letters and all the other sounds may be kind of added because of the form of the word or, the form of the verb or, plurals and so on. You add other things, but basically the core three letters are usually, well, they are always the same. So take an example like katab, which means to write. So the three-letter root is very obvious in this case. It's just K-T-B, kataba, katab. But, in a word like, kitab or maktub, you're adding some other things, but basically the KTB is always there and it's always the same. Now, these other things that you add on the side, let's call those, I guess, morphological letters or consonants. They're not always consonants, sometimes they're vowels, like in kitab. But these are obviously not part of the root itself. They're just other things that you're adding. I think morphological should be the right word. So today we're going to kind of try to see what counts as a morphological consonant, what doesn't. Now, depending on what you think the root is, because actually it's not it's not an exact science. Like we sometimes think that the root is something that just exists out there in the world, but that's not necessarily the case. In my opinion, I mean, this is kind of an opinion, but in my opinion, we analyze what the root is. I mean, we determine the root, like we assign a root to a word. It's not that the root somehow exists inherently out there in the world. So that also, as I said, it presents an interesting question because once you start to run into these kind of problematic words, it's kind of up to you to decide what do you think the most suitable root is to assign to this word when it comes to like categorizing in these root pages. So let's take a look at what those root pages actually look like. So here I have a listing. We have 52 right now. And I mean, this is just a list of the root pages themselves. And, for the most part, it's not that complicated to figure out what the root of a word is. Like if you go to the page for example, qabala, by the way, this is Arabic, this is just Fusha, but then we've actually added an entry for Palestinian Arabic or South Levantine Arabic. So these are the words that are actually used in the dialect for this root, because obviously there's plenty more, but some of them are only Fusha and that kind of thing. So this is what the root page basically looks like. It's so here you see qabala, and there's a kind of general description of what that root usually means or what words. This is important. What words usually mean when they have that root. So this is already important because one, you're talking about just the consonants, but those consonants are completely random. Like usually they have some sort of inherent meaning, which is again interesting because there's a part of the root which is just assigned, like we just choose, okay, this is the root of this verb because those are the consonants in it. But there's another part which is kind of inherent, which is the inherent meaning of the word. So sometimes, we may, like the root may not seem like this, but actually it does have this meaning. So, we'll see in a couple of problem cases that it creates a kind of situation where you just have to kind of determine, and it really becomes a matter of opinion in a way. So mainly it's me working on this. There's another person who is helping a ton, and then there's a couple of people who kind of advise on the side, and we often don't agree on what exactly, not just with regards to roots, but just in regards to what things are, what words mean, and that kind of thing. But anyway, this is one of the things that we sometimes or recently have kind of, I disagree is a strong word, but I mean, yeah, like I see the purpose and the function of this as being a little bit different from what others may think it is. I'll show you with some examples in a minute, but let's just take a look at this for now. So we have qa, ba, lam, and then here you have all the forms like ibil, qabal, itabbal, itabal, istaqbal, whatever, like all these different forms. So do check these out. Actually, I think they're really useful to like practice and get a sense of all the different possibilities. Here's this one has a lot of different verbs. Some, this root, for example, the meaning is a little bit kind of has different meanings related to shaving, or I have to kind of write these definitions based on like I write these definitions. It's not like it exists out there. It's a matter of kind of opinion in a way. So the way that I rationalize the meaning of this root, at least the second meaning, is like related to framing or being rin shaped because of some of the possible words that come out of this root, which have this kind of general meaning in a way of like a throat and a ring, like, okay, a ring, and I guess a throat is kind of like a circle. So you really have to think kind of creatively, like, how do these words all relate? And then I write this definition. Obviously, I usually refer to like other sources and stuff, but ultimately, yeah, I mean, as I said, the root in a way has an inherent meaning, but at the same time, you kind of have to glean what that meaning is. So it's really fun and really interesting. But yeah, in this case, we see there's not really that many verbs. There's just two basically as of now, unless I think of another one. But then there's a couple of nouns which are very similar. So I think it's useful to have these all in one place so you can kind of practice and see, okay, and try to not get them mixed up, like hal, hal'a, halla, halla'a. They can seem kind of similar, but this way you can kind of see a little bit the difference, I guess, by seeing them all in one place. And right now, I don't think any of these have pronunciation files, but I have been adding audios of what they sound like pronounced. I just get some friends to record them, like, native speakers. And so ideally in the future, you'll be able to just hear them all at once. So yeah, that's another example. Here we have the root ra, wa, ha, and it has a few different meanings as well. But yeah, this one has a lot of different words that come out of it. But anyway, I wanted to just jump right in and show you where this gets a lot trickier and more vague in terms of determining what the letters of the root are. There's kind of a few different scenarios where there can be some ambiguity. One is with the consonant vowels, which are ya and wow. If a word has ya or wow in the word itself, it may or may not be a part of the root. Although it's usually clear if it is a part of the root. But then the question is, like, even if the letter is yeah, actually the root may be wow. Like the consonant in the root may actually be wow. For instance, like if you think about a lot of the words that end with this alif maksura, like khalla or sawa and so on, alif cannot be a part of the root. So is it yeah or is it wow? It's definitely one of these two, but it's not always clear which one it is. So you kind of have to look at all the other words that are formed using this root and just kind of, in a way, guess, or not guess, because you're not guessing what the correct answer is. You're just basically like giving your opinion about what you think the root is. So it's actually not always that obvious. So that on one hand. And another problem case is when you have words that kind of shift for one reason or another, especially in the dialect. Like maybe in Fusha it was in this form, but in the dialect it's in another form, and new consonants seem to appear. So then what do you do with that? Is it still a part of the original root or not? So let's actually look at one such case. Let's look at the page 4, fa, ra, shin. So this root gives us the verb like farash. Basically, I gave the definition as relating to furnishing, spreading out, or laying out. So furnishing, I guess, like, yeah, I mean, actually in Fusha, it's where it has some of these other like spreading out and laying out meanings. Not so much in the dialect, which it mainly gives us words for furniture. But yeah, so this is the page for this root, but there's actually one word that, in my opinion, is missing. Now, in the opinion of others, it's not missing because it does not belong on this page, and that's really interesting because there's actually not an agreement on whether a word belongs or it has this root or not. Now, what is this root? Well, it's actually we've identified this in a couple of cases where it seems that sometimes certain form two verbs from Fosha. So form two is like, I don't know, rattab or, well, sawwa, although it has a broken ending. Or, I don't know, why am I blanking? Awad, or, you know, it has a shadda in the middle of the verb. So, for example, gasal versus gassal. So, a couple of form two verbs from Fosha seem to have become basically actually like four letter or four consonant words in the dialect by the addition of a broken ending. So let me give you an example, although I've kind of hinted at what I'm going to show you here. But let me give you an example. So the verb itfarraj means to look. And this, well, yeah, so this root is fa, ra, jim, right? Itfarraj, to look. But there's another word that is similar. Now, whether it has the same root or not is debatable, but there's another word that's similar, which is farja. So you have itfarraj, which means to look, and then you have farja, which means to show. Now, okay, fine, they both have this meaning of kind of sight, but first of all, remember what I said, that some of these broken ending, like three letter plus a broken ending words seem to come from form 2 in Fusha, which kind of makes sense because usually a form 2 verb means to do something to something else, and then form 5 is like when I do it by myself. So farraj would be form 2, and itfarraj is form 5. Another example would be, for example, ithammam means to bathe, like I bathed, but hammam in form 2, so ithammam is form 5. Hammam in form 2 is to bathe something else or someone. So hammam, to bathe, ithammam, for me to bathe. So with itfarraj, it means to look, but I guess if you think about what the form 2 would be, farraj, which by the way is not said in the dialect. We don't say farraj in the dialect, we say farja. But anyway, the form 2 would be to make someone look, so to show. But again, so this is what farraj, that's what would actually make sense. Itfarraj versus farraj. But that's not what we have. We have itfarraj versus farja, which again, it seems to be that this form, original form 2, farraj, was transformed into, basically you take the three root letters and then add a broken ending. So it seems that from farraj, it went to farja. So that's an example that is much more obvious of like this, like here there's a clear counterpart between itfarraj and farja, even though normally it's form 5 versus form 2 and not form 5 versus whatever this farja is, which is kind of a weird, it's not a common type of verb. Three letters with a broken ending, that's very rare because that's basically a four consonant word, because a broken ending usually means a consonant vowel like ya or waw. Like in sawwa, you have two letters, sin, waw, but then the a of sawwa, that's actually, it's a broken verb, but that third kind of missing consonant is actually a consonant in the root. It's either ya or wa. So farja, by that criteria, is actually a four consonant word, fa, ra, jim, and I guess either ya or wa. Let's say ya. So now let's take a look at this. So I was telling you that here it seems like there's a word missing. Now that's because we actually have a case like in farja. The word that is missing here is farsha, which means to brush. So if you think about it, if the root fa, ra, shin means, at least in Fusha originally, it has this meaning of like spreading out or laying out. Now it just means to furnish in the dialect mostly. But if you think about that, farrash, which is not what we have here, we have farsha. But if in Fusha, I mean, if you think about what the original meaning of farrash would have been, that would be, yeah, spreading something out, laying it out. So in the dialect, this means to brush, which kind of makes sense in a weird way. You're kind of laying out I don't know, yeah, I mean, you're kind of doing this motion. So, but now the interesting thing is like, well, now that we've added this additional consonant, technically, I mean, even though it's pronounced as a vowel, I told you usually this indicates, or no, it always indicates consonant vowel like yeah or well. So now that we've added this, suddenly the root is actually fa, ra, shin, yeah. But is it? That's my question. So actually, this is where there's a point of disagreement because I would say that the root of this word is still fa, ra, shin. Because when I think about roots, yes, I do think about what the consonants are in the word. Like that's the kind of basic sense of how you get the root, just pick out the consonants. But I also think of them as like semantic categories. And as I was telling you, roots, as I was showing you here, like, I mean, they have their own kind of inherent meaning. So, like, this four-letter root, this doesn't have any special meaning or anything like that. It's just that this yeah has been added later because of a transformation of the word from farrash to farsha. So the question is like, does this belong in a page for this, or does it belong in the page for fa, ra, shin, just without the yeah? I would say it's better to group it because with fa, ra, shin, because etymologically and originally, like that's what the root is. But if you only look at the root in this kind of scientific way of like just picking out the consonants, then yeah, of course this is the root. But is it really the best way? And that's basically my question for today. So please let me know what you think, because actually it's not, I mean, it is debatable. And I'm a little bit in the losing ground in this discussion because, yeah, I mean, it seems that most people would say, or at least the people that I've been talking to would say, no, just list the root as this. And, I mean, as I said, it's not an exact science. I mean, there's no right answer because as I said, the root doesn't just exist out there in the world. Like we determine what it is. We assign the root. So we've assigned this root, but should we assign another root? So here's another example. So I gave you farraj, which became farja, to show. So technically, it's farraj, to look, would have a different root than farja, to show. Even though farja, to show, probably comes from farraj, which is the kind of to make someone look, basically. So clearly it is derived from this original root, but somehow it doesn't share that root anymore. So I find that a little bit like I get the point. I get why this should be considered a part of the root in a way, like just because it's a consonant in the word, but I still think it's not that productive, in my opinion. Anyway, I want to give you another example with the root ta, ain, mim. So this root usually has to do with like flavors and tastes. We don't have a page for it yet, but we get the words like ta'am, which means like a taste or flavor, and we also have mat'am, which means a restaurant. Now there's a word that is related to this, which doesn't have that root apparently, if we consider the root this way. And that word, as you can expect, is ta'ama, which means, well, think about it. If it comes from form 2, ta'am, which means to make someone taste, if you think about it that way, like if you just combine the meaning of, the form 2, which means to make someone do something, plus the meaning of taste, which is the meaning of the root, means to make someone taste, that kind of thing. So in the dialect, ta'ama, so it was transformed from ta'am, I guess, to ta'ama. In the dialect, it means to feed, which actually makes complete sense. Like it makes complete sense that this word means to feed because it comes from this root, and yet it doesn't have the root. So that's kind of interesting. It's kind of weird because it clearly has the meaning of the root, but it doesn't have that root. So it's a debatable point, and really, I want to know what you think about this. Whether you think this should be categorized alongside words like mata'am and just ta'am and whatever, or whether it should be marked as having this. So, and this is not the only type of, I mean, this is one example of kind of problematic words. Farja, ta'ama, farsha. But there's others. Like, for example, this is an interesting one. So we have the root sin, lam, mim, which, gives us words like salam and salame, Islam, and all this. So it relates to submission and surrender, or peace and safety and well-being. And of course, like it gives us the word Islam, which is actually the verbal noun of the verb aslam, which means, it means to convert to Islam, but like technically, originally the meaning is basically to surrender to God, right? So that's how you become Muslim. So that's why it still has this meaning of submission and surrender. So we have that verb in the dialect, you can say that, but it's not that simple, because what happens is the verb aslam in the dialect, it can be pronounced one of two ways. And actually, the more common way is the one that's a little bit problematic for our purposes with regards to the root. So it's a form 4 verb normally, aslam, which means that this hamza alif is not a part of the root, because it's just one of these morphological consonants that you add to a word because of the form. So in a form 5 verb like ithammam, the T is just a morphological, you just add it because of the form, not because it's a part of the root. Same here. This hamza is not a part of the root, of course. So the root is just sin, lam, mim. And in the present tense, that would be bislim. It's, for example, like the verb a'lan, which means to announce. Hamza, a'lan. Yeah, and in the present, it's bi'lan. So aslam, a'lan, bislim, bi'lan. But this is a comparatively, slightly more formal form of this verb, at least in the present tense, bislim. And actually, the more common way to say it, apparently, is actually not as bislim, but as bi'aslim. This may seem not very important, but actually is very important, because now, see, this hamza is just a part of the form 4, but here, it should not be there. So what that means is that this consonant has been added not for morphological reasons or anything like that, but it's just a consonant that is part of the verb. That's part of the word. So in the word bi'aslim, the argument goes that actually the root of this word is not sin lam mim, it's hamza sin lam mim, because this hamza should not actually be there, which means it's like a 4-letter root, like a word like tarjam, for example. So now listen to this. Aslam, tarjam, bi'aslim, bitarjam, versus aslam, a'lan, and bislim, bi'lan. So there's a difference between bislim, bi'lan, and bi'aslim, bitarjam. Bitarjam is a 4-letter root. Bi'aslim has also 4 consonants. But the question is that first hamza, should it be considered part of the root or not? If by root you just mean all the consonants that are not related to morphology or anything, but they're just a part of the, they cannot be removed from the verb in any way, then yeah, that's the root. But obviously the origin is sin lam mim, and it's just a variation of this. So does it really count as a new root? And ultimately the question comes down to, what do you want to get out of this category? Like, what do you mean by a root? What is a root, and what do you want it to be? Because if we just want it to be this kind of scientific thing just based on consonants, then that's one thing. But if we want to consider it like a semantic category, then and a kind of etymological category about the origin of words, then definitely I think that this should count as having the root sin lam mim. Fortunately, in the past tense, it's the same, so it's still, there's no difference in the actual root page. But as we saw in the case of farsha and ta'ama and so on, those words are going to get left out of the root pages, and they're not going to be considered as somehow being a part of that group because something has been added to them. And I think that's kind of unfortunate, maybe more correct from a technical standpoint, but I prefer to list roots in a combination of the consonants, but also etymology and semantics. So that's another example. And the last one that I'll give that is kind of interesting is this root, I guess, which is ayn, ya, dal. I put this in quotes because it's kind of debatable whether it's a root at all, because the only words that we really have with this root are Eid and Ayyad, which is, to celebrate a holiday, which obviously is basically a transformation of Eid into a verb. So it's not the same word, but one is just based on the other. So the meaning I've written as related to holidays, but this is because I had actually kind of made a mistake, and I wouldn't have created this entry to begin with. I would have just put it under Ain Waw Dal, but basically I got scolded and I was told that it should be here, not there. And why is that? Well, if we look at the root Ain Waw Dal, we actually have a ton of words with this root because it's a very productive root, which has to do with like returning or repetition and something like that. Now, as it turns out, if you actually go to the entry for Eid, first of all, the Fosha page doesn't list a root. Maybe that's just an oversight or something. But I guess like you could analyze the root of this word as being Ain Ya Dal, not wow, but Ya. And that's because the only kind of other form that we have of this word from which we can glean what is the root is Ayad. And there's no wow anywhere. So we can't, from one perspective, we can't say that the root has wow because there's no wow anywhere to be seen. Whereas sometimes like words like beit, buyut, okay, well, no, that's not bab, bawab. Okay, so suddenly a wow appeared out of bab. So that tells us that, okay, so the root is probably, we can say that the middle consonant of the root is wow. But in this case, we don't have any such information. So we can just say that I guess the root is Ain, Ya, Dal. But what happens? Where does this word come from? Well, it comes from Syriac, which is another Semitic language. And in Syriac, by the way, to my understanding, all Semitic languages have some kind of root-based system. Not necessarily three, but I guess Syriac does. And actually, so Syriac has its own three-letter root system. And the word Eid comes from Syriac, where the root is, guess what? Ain, Waw, Dal. So, from a kind of broader Semitic look, by the way, the root Ain, Waw, Dal is, I guess, in some way cognate or like related to Ain, Waw, Dal in Arabic, like the Syriac versus the Arabic. So, because, like, in this sense, etymologically and semantically, Eid is related to words that have the root Ain, Waw, Dal, I would like to categorize it with that root. I don't really see the problem with that, especially because it's kind of a marginal word. And like the only thing to tell us that it doesn't have the root Ain, Waw, Dal is because in Arabic, the plural has been transformed into ayad, so there's no wow. Okay, yeah, I get that. So if you just group it in the sense of what are the consonants and what can we see, then yeah, I guess yeah is the middle consonant. But as I said, I think that it would be more useful personally to include this with, where is it? With Ain, Waw, Dal. But instead we have this kind of stub entry, which just has these two. Now it does say related to the root Ain, Waw, Dal. So I guess that's something. But anyway, it's food for thought. I don't know what you think, whether this should be categorized with the Ain, Waw, Dal words or whether it should just be considered separately. Again, for me, it's more about convenience and like kind of emphasizing the semantic relationship between words because this is obviously semantically and etymologically related. So this makes it seem a little bit separate in this way. But that's just an opinion. Now, something interesting to point out is that when I brought up this word ayyad, someone said, well, definitely it's not Ain, Waw, Dal because you can see the middle consonant is yeah, right? That's the one, it's not awad, it's ayyad. Well, that's fine. I get the point there, but we run into like other problem cases, like with the root nun, waw, mim. We have nawam, which makes sense because you're emphasizing this waw, but we also have nayyam. So we have nawam and we have nayyam. And with the root ra, waw, ha, we have rawah and we have rayyah. So we do have that. Like if you looked at this and you just wanted to look at the consonants, then what? I mean, I guess the root should be ra, ya, ha, and nayyam, the root should be nun, ya, mim. So if you're going to say that it's not, if you're going to say that this word belongs here, then why do these words need to belong here and they can't actually be here? So that's basically my question for you. I want to know what you think. So please leave a comment and tell me, what is a root? Basically, please answer that question for us so that we can determine what's the best approach. What do you think is more useful, basically? Because ultimately these entries are for you, and we're doing all this for you. So the question is, what do you think? I mean, well, not just what's more useful, because I think undoubtedly it's more useful to group these words rather than create all these or identify all these like other roots, like farsha with the yeah and all these extra things. I definitely think this is more convenient, but do consider like, okay, I mean, I do get the point that from a strict kind of perspective of like getting the consonants, there it may not be somehow technically correct. But the thing is, again, what is technically correct? I don't really think that this is a science. Like, ultimately, I think it is much more ambiguous and subjective than it really seems at first. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. And I really hope to see you for some other of these development, Wiktionary development blogs slash language blogs. Yeah, I like this format because I can show you a little bit what we've been doing, but also discuss some really interesting questions. So I think this, hope this was useful. I hope this was interesting. And yeah, let me know what you think, and I will see you for the next one.